Hello and welcome back to another episode. This is the SoapyRao Show, the place you come to have fun and listen to some great people. Having said that, today I've got an extremely interesting person who's got a very, very interesting take on life and performance and how you can become a better version of yourself. He's an international author, he's an award-winning speaker, and he's an expert in strategic performance. All the way from the Netherlands, joining me today is Mr. Paul Rulkens. Paul, thank you so much for joining me.
Great to be on the show. Hi.
Hi. So, the weird thing in a time of so-called isolation, living in a lockdown, is you kind of turn to the internet, to the ether, where you find information. And I came across your talk, which of course is gone through the world. It's reached so many people, and a lot of people have benefited from it. And I want to talk about that in a bit. But before that, you focus a lot and you help companies, you consult with them, you're on the board of companies with performance, with strategy, and how to make their programs or whatever they might have need in more efficient and more productive. And in that context, we've just sort of slowly opening up. We're in the month of October, going into November. Around the world, things are slowly easing up. So from your point of view, from your experience, this conversation is so important for everyone at all points in time, right? In a competitive environment. But how has the lockdown impacted performance and a perception of performance for, let's start with individuals and go into the corporates?
Yeah. Well, I see a couple of things with the lockdown, and also look at it myself. And of course, I was in lockdown myself. The first thing that I see is that after the initial shock of the lockdown, typically what happens is that organizations, people, they start to adjust. So they quickly move, hey, this is not something we can do, we have done before, but we need to do something, we need to drive strategy, we need to drive strategy execution. So they become creative. Let's do things online, let's train things online. That's typically what I saw in the reaction there.
Yeah.
The second thing which I saw is that if you want to do things differently initially, you have a lot of success, but at a certain point in time, you see that performance deteriorates. And especially in a lockdown, typically what you see when you work online with teams within an organization, you can drive milestones, you can drive execution, but the thing is that oftentimes the key decisions are being made in the more human interaction. So that human interaction that all of a sudden became very important, and that was missing. So what I've also seen is that the best people, teams, and organizations, what they realize, this is missing. So what is it that we can do to introduce this, even in an online environment, to work more rapidly? So they looked at issues less from a mechanical point of view, but much more from a human point of view. And that's interesting. If you start to look at issues, then all of a sudden you become creative as well. I've seen companies very creative, doing very creative things online to keep a connection with other people. So I think that is the next step in doing this.
Understood. Now, so when you when you look at multiple societies who are evaluating multiple individuals, and they have various contexts for that, whether it's from a performance of a startup to a performance of an individual within a corporate structure. Do you think something like this, such an event of global scale, which sort of put everyone sort of had to sort of stop in their tracks for a second, going, what hit us, right? Do you think the parameters for performance and as a result, the parameters for outcome will change? And do you think will people as individuals appreciate more sort of unique things, or maybe the range of things that drove them earlier, which earlier could have been money or could have been stock options, whatever it could have been? Do you think those incentives or those parameters have changed now?
I think that there is a change. If you look at what has happened, is that many individuals, many teams, many organizations through the pandemic, they realized they were much less robust than they initially were.
Right.
And robustness means that they were very fragile. If there was a shock in the system, all of a sudden you see that the performance was also deteriorating. So in other words, they thought they were high in performance, but in reality it was only a glitch, momentary thing. So it made them think, what is it that I need to do in order to make this sustainable, future proof? And I think that translates into what is important for an organization. and also for the team and individual. So it's not the momentary performance, even the performance next year or last year, but it is fundamental thinking. What is it that we need to do in order to create an individual, a team, or an organization which is able to perform on a high level consistently also in the future? And that gives many openings in thinking. And I give you one example. One of my clients, they realized that part of their business was very fragile due to shocks, and the reason was they were not very good at it. So what they realized, let's get rid of this business, give it to someone else who's much better in this one, and what is left is much more robust, much stronger. So that's that type of thinking, which was not prevalent a year or 2 years ago when the mantra was simply growth. This was adding to the growth. So that's one example.
Right. Do you think that performance can complement sustainability? Like, do you think there's a way in which people can, or rather the environment, or we can protect things like mental health and family, and it's not a business question, but it's just sort of the surrounding things that happen, because you hear people say these things like work-life balance, which in itself doesn't really make too much sense for me, because work isn't life. You can't really equate work to life, right? But it's one thing you do in life is work, but there are these various things that how much work do you carry home to improve your performance. Of course, it's efficiency, the various factors, and you'll be in a better place to answer this. But is it possible to have an individual or a company performing without having negative consequences on its environment or the situation it is set in?
I think it is, and here's the key. The key is, especially when you talk about performance, one of the mistakes here is to think that performance is about more, better, faster, working harder, trying to spin this hamster wheel faster and faster.
More, better, faster. Right.
Yeah. So performance is a much more strategic thing. What is it I can do to step out of this hamster wheel, connect the hamster wheel to a little electrical engine and make it spin 10 times faster than I can do it myself. And what I found is that the way to approach this is not to try to add stuff to things, but to get rid of stuff. And I call this concept strategic quitting. And often what you see is that when people, teams, and organizations look at performance, look at ways to improve performance, it's about getting rid of everything which masks your strength. Everything which is not part of your core, part of the thing that you can do. So the ability to strategically quit things equals the ability to massively succeed also in a sustainable way in the future. And I think that is the key also to drive a sustainable performance, and getting rid of stuff which is in the end making you fragile.
So do you think, so what are some of the things that you've witnessed companies, organizations doing over the past few months to so-called cut the dead branches? What are some of the things that they've got rid of?
Yeah, I see that several levels. Of course, it's at the business level. Hey, these are parts of the business which are part of growth, but low margin, takes a lot of energy. So someone else can do that. And that's typically one example. But the other example is, for example, in the teams. If you talk about high performance teams, also there, a high performance teams is a team where each individual will operate at its strength. It's a success environment for each of the individuals. And what companies and teams also realize is that sometimes you have teams where you have individuals which are toxic. And toxic, what I mean with toxic is they perform, they do the thing that they need to do, but they are detrimental to the energy level of the team. So every time you have someone in that team, you see people are struggling, and it's not a high energy. And strategic quitting is asking yourself a fundamental question as a leader: what is it I want to do with toxic people?
Absolutely.
And sometimes the approach is, well, let's try to save them. But what they also found is, hey, wait a second, if I take them out of the team, put them, for instance, somewhere else where they can operate better, all of a sudden I make my team much more robust, much more future proof. And that's also an application of strategic quitting. Taking out things is often the superior approach to high performance. An example of that one.
Yeah. No, I think that's amazing that you take out one or the strongest element in the team, but as a result, who's toxic, but as a result, you end up with five or how many ever left in the team who aren't as strong, but together make it much better, right?
Exactly. Yeah.
And no, you mentioned like the key, the core ideas which need to be driven by human interaction. That's something that came through during the lockdown. But as in general, do you think that when people are at home, like there's one thing we face in India, which is terrible infrastructure, right? When people are driving to work, they have a lot of traffic, terrible pollution, a lot of noise levels. It's just a lot of stress getting to work. And in many cases, they spend a 2-hour commute going in and a 2-hour commute coming out. So now when they had to avoid, or rather not avoid, but when all that was taken away and they had to sit at home and do these calls from the, being around their family. Yes, of course, it was a pandemic. But do you think, have you observed people's performance or enthusiasm or something contributing to their increased contribution to the company organization?
What I see is that a lot of people were able to perform and do well in a new environment because it had all kind of advantages. For example, the traffic time was less.
Yeah.
People were reporting were much more efficient doing things and doing it myself.
Yeah.
The thing, however, what is missing there, or what is being introduced with the pandemic, with online working, is an additional layer of uncertainty. And uncertainty is something that masks the strength of individuals. And what I mean with uncertainty is, if you work together with human beings, we are social creatures. It's the small stuff, the water cooler conversations, the subtle body language, which gives you direction in where individuals or teams or even leaders are going. Now, online, all of these clues are missing. And typically what you see is there's a systematic uncertainty. It creates uncertainty.
Right.
Now, this is what leaders need to do. They need, first of all, they need to address this.
So like scope for misunderstanding, that kind of stuff?
Sorry?
Like possible scope for misunderstanding, possible miscommunication, that kind of stuff, right?
Yeah. So it's important to create awareness for leaders, also for team members. Hey, this is a situation where we create additional uncertainty noise in the system. And what is that I can do as an individual to truly focus on getting rid of the noise? And there are a couple of things that you can do. For example, one of the most successful leaders I have seen, they were very clear, very focused on these are the goals as a team. And every time the team would come together, let's go through the goals. Where are we? Do we still agree on the goals? Is this something you want to do? So it's not assumed that everyone is on board. No, it's about constantly reinforcing that message. The second best practice is every time you connect with someone, don't start with driving milestones and performance, but start with a simple question. How's your energy level? On a scale of 1 to 10, how is it right now? And based on the input, based on the feedback, you understand as a leader, where do I need to calibrate? If people are low in energy, what is it I need to do to drive them to a high energy? So it's a very important question that you need to ask. And the third thing, which I have seen as a best practice, is to give an additional focus on quitting stuff. What is it that you can do in your work to stop, which will release the time and the energy and the resources to do different things? And often when people talk about quitting stuff, strategic quitting stuff, it's often the stuff which, first of all, doesn't contribute much to the overall performance of the company. And the second thing, it often is something which spends a lot of energy. It consumes a lot of energy. It's not fun anyway. So you raise energy with people if you talk about strategic quitting stuff.
Yeah. No, I think that's a really cool concept to sort of use as a filter to look at. You think, what can I get rid of, which was just there for appearance and not really functioning or contributing to the the performance of the company. But one thing I want to ask you, it might not be I don't know how to say it's there's this big trend right now where a lot of people are just going out there, completing their undergraduation, and then just getting an MBA program, getting into the MBA program because they think that, and this is of course in India, which is churning out high levels of MBA graduates, but they think that is going to get them ahead in the game. So I don't know if the question is appropriate, but how much does that enhance a person's chances or, let's say, performance compared to someone who doesn't have an MBA but really sort of maybe has a better perspective on how to use things like strategic quitting. And I read something which you put up, how to use common sense,
Your
So,
content.
what would you weigh? Because I think it's very important, because common sense sometimes just goes out of the window when you're so worried about which college, what grade, the networking program, etc., etc. So, if you could take that, that would be interesting to hear.
Yeah. Well, here's my perspective. I think there's a triangle here. And if you look at performance, you talk about skills, you talk about character, and the strong mindset and behaviors. That is character for me, but also about relationships. Those are three things which typically drive performance. If you look at the value of an MBA, I think the biggest value of an MBA is to create relationships you may not have created in another way. And that's why you see that the most successful MBAs come from. They are focused on building relationships, and through relationships, you can apply the relationships and raise the bar for yourself, your team, your organization. Now, when it comes to skill sets, I think the value of an MBA is much less. I think the skill sets, first of all, can be received, can be learned in a different way. In education, I mean, there's a lot of educational stuff around on the YouTube, but even reading books is usually good enough to take the next steps there. So it can be applied in a much faster way. The other thing is that often in education, the skill sets which you learn might not be applicable to the environment in which you operate. You are taught stuff to improve potential, but not performance. And the difference between the two is performance, you see immediately a positive impact. Potential is something that might happen in the future. So I see a lot of MBAs working on potential instead of performance, which in the end, in an ever-changing environment, might be a waste of time because the potential right now might be very different from 5 or 10 years ago. So that's where I see a limited value, and probably common sense is much better. And the third one is character. I believe character is something which is about personal development. It is something that is not explicitly handled in an MBA, but can be handled in real work, and that's where common sense also pops in. So I believe the value of an MBA can be there, especially in relationships. The character and the skill building perhaps can be done in a very different way, especially in a changing environment.
That's such a important thing to understand, because when the way we approach education is that I've learned this for a certain purpose, so I'm going to apply it, I'm going to get this job, I'm going to get a certain hike because of the certain whatever enhancement in my career. But this thing of adapting, the ability or the tools you have to cope with changing environments will take you so much farther than a sort of rigid way of looking at a job or a rigid way of learning. And that leads me to sort of ask you what your opinion on this is, because I heard and I felt in many ways the education system was kind of revealed to show a lot of gaps in the way things were approached, things were taught, and how things were being, the things which were being taught were really not relevant anymore. Do you think, in a similar context, and your opinion on the programs which were sort of designed for people who want to get into business, into starting a business, maybe even understanding business or processes, do you think those programs were able to adapt, or were they also sort of, did they fall short?
No doubt there's a huge variety there, a mix of successful programs and less successful programs. I think if you look at the characteristics of successful programs, is it will open up avenues. It will give you access to different ideas, different way of thinking, different ways of doing it. It triggers curiosity. The successful MBA student or the successful student takes this curiosity and becomes a work in progress. In other words, if there's a subject which you enjoy, which you like, it's the education which will not be the end of the subject. It's the beginning of your journey. And the trick
kind of whetting your appetite.
Embrace it. Embrace it. And I always give an example. If you want to become an expert in your field, then it's very simple. Read the top 50 books in your field. Take a year, read the top 50 books in your field, and you are the expert in your field. So you will not get it from the MBA, but you will get it from your own development and the curiosity which is part of the development. So that's where I think that the most successful educational institutes are working on to trigger curiosity, but it's the students which need to bring it to the next level and with their own education.
And that's sort of where the student adds his or her individual experiences, life experiences, and their things that shape them into who they are, and they add that to the education. So it's sort of like an ingredient into making this this project, which is going to evolve with time and experience, right?
Absolutely. And so the applicability of information is a one-on-one. It's a very tangible way of improving performance.
It's such an interesting time. At the beginning, I spoke about the world of the internet, but you also hear a lot of these get-rich-quick YouTube videos or tutorials or books on this. But you mentioned something very interesting. I read the top 50 books in that subject, right? But, if someone's listening right now and they really are keen on improving their performance, and of course, it's very individual, dependent on individuals' motivation, various other factors. But from your experience, what are some of the, I would say, 3 things that make people, I wouldn't say successful alone, but an overall package as someone who can really cope and someone who can really last and stand the test of time in a corporate environment, or maybe running a business? What are some of these things which could be, business sort of related, but could just be overall life kind of traits which you've noticed working with such people?
I think a couple of things will work. The first of all is the realization that if you talk about performance, it's a combination of 2 things. It's about skill and it's about luck, right? So these 2 are the 2 components of any performance. And if you want to be successful in a field, if you want to grow in a field, the trick is to understand which part of my success is based on luck, which part is based on skill. Now, if you talk about sustainable performance, you always need to move to a place where the impact of your skill is maximized and the impact of luck is minimized.
Absolutely.
And I call this path dependency. For example, if there's a posh neighborhood and you have a dentist and you have a lottery winner living together. And what path dependency means is if the dentist could live 1,000 lives, probably 90% of lives, he or she would be highly successful, would live in this neighborhood. But the lottery winner would only have one path. So in 999 times, he or she will not be successful. So it doesn't make any sense to want the ambition to become a lottery winner. And that's what I see with get-rich-quick schemes. By definition, it's a path-dependent thing. Which might not be totally nonsense, but it is the probability is very small. So
the lucky break is great, but you can't sustain it.
You can't sustain it. So it's not something that you can influence from that perspective. That's one thing. And the second thing, which I think is important, if you talk about high performance, people start to raise the bar, truly raise the bar, become exceptional in the interface of 3 areas when they do activities. First of all, they are passionate about it. The second thing is they have skill in order to make it happen. And the third thing is they create value for other people. And those are the 3 areas which drive high performance individuals. So one of the
you would say service to others. Is that the third point? Could it be mentioned?
It's service to others means I create value.
Right.
So once you realize, hey, these are activities, I'm passionate about it, I'm skilled at it, and it creates value for others. What is it I can do more of these, because this will really set me apart from everything else. This is where I really shine. So that's the second approach. And the third approach, and that's the application of power laws. And what a power law means is that small input will have a huge output. Small input, huge output. For example, the 80-20 rule. 20% of your effort will result in 80% of your outcomes. Now, the power laws, what it means is that you need to apply power laws where small differences consistently applied will have a huge impact on your results. And what it means is if you want to do sustainable performance, you don't have to become twice as good. But you only need to become a little bit better at a few things which truly matter in your field, in your expertise, in your environment. And that's how you stand apart from anyone else.
Right. So if I have to understand that, say from an athlete's point of view, so if a person wants to become a better tennis player, it doesn't mean they have to become 4 times the athlete and become completely sort of focused on building muscle, and this thing, and become the sort of biggest version of themselves in that way. But all they have to do is probably work on a little bit more on, say, a better swing, or a better sort of 3-4 elements which helps the game of tennis more specifically, right?
Yeah, I give you an example of an airline pilot. If you look at an airline pilot crossing the Pacific, they sit 10 hours in a plane. It's maybe 20 minutes or so that they truly add value. It's landing, it's lifting up, and it's emergencies, and that's where they need to be aware. That's need to be at their best, right?
Yeah.
And the rest of the time they can do automatic pilot, really. Now, if you want to become a better pilot, those are the 3 things you need to focus on.
Right.
So this is how you can apply power laws, and this is how you can become better. Now, there's a corollary there that focus on does not necessarily mean that you need to add things or try to improve. Often it means that you need to get rid of the behaviors which mask your strength.
Right. Understood.
So it's not only about building stuff, but about getting rid of things that mask your strength. And I see that often in leaders, very successful leaders. If they want to improve, it's usually no longer about adding additional skills. No. It's about behaviors, and especially getting rid of behaviors which mask their strength. For example,
very interesting.
Sometimes you have leaders who are lousy listeners, right? They listen to reply instead of listening to understand. If such a leader wants to improve, it's not about building new skill sets, but it's simply about stopping to not listen to people. Getting rid of that. And that's the behavior. If you focus on that one, this is really how you take the next step. So sometimes performance can be that simple, right?
Yeah, I think it's quite nice to hear it, because sometimes you get and I'm going to talk about something which you and I have in common, because I think you at some point and I at this point are stand-up comedians. So we have and I'm just going to use stand-up as an example, right? Because I've been at it for about 11 years, and according to maybe outcome, possibly not the most successful comedian, but if you take performance, if that's something which can apply to comedy, you can understand, in a context of jokes, joke writing. You can talk about things like how many laughs per minute, if you want to go specific, but maybe just generally how sustainably funny can you be over a course of time, right? But what I realized last year is that a lot of my focus was on the peripheral aspects of stand-up, which was the business, the marketing. And when I mean that, it's things which aren't entirely in my control, like the luck aspect, right? Getting a break, or getting someone to pick up my special, or trying to sell out venues. And that was taking up 90%, which as a result affected the focus, which should have been 90% of the focus should have been on getting better and funnier, and getting more authentic, getting my true sort of self out there. And instead of that, I was trying to add on things, as you said, add on, wouldn't call it skills alone, but add on things like a social media manager, an agent, a promoter, a thing, as opposed to just saying, none of this is important. Let me just get funny first. That's the skill, as you called it,
Yeah. I think this is a great insight in how you can improve. Focus on the things which truly matter. And master those things.
Yeah, because what happens is there's so much of this competitive, and I'm sure you've met other comedians, and some of them are really funny, but some of them have their intentions of just the byproducts, right? They just want to be in it for the limelight, and they don't want to sort of write good material, make people laugh. They just want to say, you know what, I'm going to go and sort of kind of take things, chop them up, make them whatever palatable, but just get really good at my social media game and get funny. You know what I mean? So I realized that when the lockdown happened, I was forced to let go of a way of thinking about stand-up, because earlier stand-up was the sole identity I sort of relied on. So if I failed at a show or didn't perform well or didn't get a gig or a corporate client passed me over for some other person or someone else got a Netflix or an Amazon special, that would affect my person as opposed to just saying, okay, another gig will come. So this thing, maybe, I've spoken to someone on this podcast earlier about the idea of self-worth, which is related to achievement and ability. But from your experience, the things you worked with, and maybe using whichever example you find appropriate, how does performance depend, or rather not performance alone, but how does someone get out of this trap where they want to sort of focus on the core, but it takes time to get better as a writer, performer, timing, all these things to find your comedic voice sometimes. And while you're trying to work on all these things, you're distracted by these things like success and fame and all these opportunities which are just going past you. They're younger comedians or less experienced, or in some cases, someone who you think is less funny going ahead in the game. How does someone maybe in this state, possibly even me, how do you focus on what's important?
I think a couple of things, and I speak from my personal experience. What helps here? Mm-hmm. The first thing is to learn from the best, right?
Okay.
Especially if you have role models, right? People who have done it and have reached the level that you want to reach. What is it that you can learn from them?
Yeah.
So that's one part. But keep in mind that learning means the stuff which is skill, not the luck part, but the skill part. So which are the skills which are learnable. And the second thing which I've seen is learning often happens also from the people who do it wrong. Yeah. So the negative examples.
Yeah.
And I always, whenever I speak with my daughter, I always mention some people are an example, but others are a warning. Right.
Yeah.
And often we can learn much more from the warnings than from the examples. So that's the second thing that you can apply. And the third thing is that you need to fall in love with your craft.
Yeah.
Skill, passion, creating value for others. Falling in love. You need to feel it, right? You need to master this. But the thing is that the definition of the craft, if you make it very narrow, it puts you in a very narrow box. If you broaden this definition, all of a sudden there might be opportunities which are interesting there as well. And let me give you it from my perspective. I was also trained as a stand-up comedian. I enjoyed doing it, but at a certain point in time, I realized, wait a second, my craft might not be stand-up comedian, but my craft is much broader.
Okay.
And then I moved into professional speaking. And the interesting thing is that in professional speaking, I could use the skill set of stand-up comedy and at the same time using the skill sets which I'm using now as well, high performance, strategic thinking, and helping successful individuals become even more successful. So
that is truly.
You simply need to look at the definition of what success would look like and broaden your horizon where you can apply those skills in different ways.
I think that's truly. I think that's really well put. And I think that's amazing because, we're so narrow-minded, as you mentioned, and we're so stuck to the label, right? We want to hold on to this, that I'm a comedian, I'm a stand-up comedian. So you then kind of box yourself into the thing that a stand-up comedian should be seen doing, right? Which is relentlessly hitting open mics with 3 people in them. Of course, now, if you get better at a joke and eventually that leads to somewhere, it helps. But if you're just doing that and calling yourself saying, I'm an authentic comedian, and you continuously end up doing the same thing, it's like flogging a dead horse, right? It doesn't really go anywhere. And I think that's a really nice thing you said just now, keeping your sort of your sights everywhere, yet focusing on a few core strengths is what tends to happen. Then is you might say, you know what, and this is something that happened to me, so I can relate to what you just said. I was like, why are you so hell-bent on this label of comedian, and then making it all about how things either did or didn't work towards that particular effort? But you know what? I love speaking, and we're doing this right now, and I'm thoroughly enjoying it, right? And when I do corporate gigs, I tell them, now let's not say stand-up comedy performance. Let's call it a fun talk. Now there I can talk about my life experience. I can talk about things I've learned, jokes I've written, perspectives that I've gained. And as a result, it's not stand-up comedy, but it's people are laughing, people are getting a sort of wholer approach. And I'm having fun because I'm not under pressure on a Zoom call trying to make people laugh, and half of them are on mute. And I'm like, what's going on? You know?
Yeah.
But how does someone even understand that? Because they're so scared of letting go, right? Like, say someone is, is a fantastic singer-songwriter, and they're just not getting that. Their skill is good, their luck is really, really bad. So how did someone like that realize or even attempt to understand what his or her options are? Like, what is that? Is there a skill in that, or is there a certain kind of thing you have to be aware of when you're in that state?
I think it starts with awareness, and the awareness in this case is what you need to realize is, especially singer-songwriters, some coasts are made for shipwreck. Yeah,
right.
And what it means is that you can be the best in what you do, but if you operate in an environment where people do not appreciate what you're doing, you cannot be successful, even if you hone your craft. If you're surrounded by deaf people, you can have the most beautiful voice in the world, but no one will appreciate you.
Yeah,
that's the thinking there.
Yeah,
so it doesn't make any sense to improve your voice, right?
Yeah, yeah.
So you need to realize, hey, is this the place where people love my work?
Right.
And I see that with many professionals, perhaps stuck in their career, and often it's not about not having the skill sets or the character. They are very good at what they are doing, but they simply operate in an environment where people simply do not love their work. Yeah? So the trick for them is not to try to change the environment, but the trick for them is to simply go to a different environment where people appreciate what you're doing. That is very important concept.
Can you say environment is a different market?
Yeah.
Okay.
So go to a different place, and once you start thinking about that, ideas may open up. Because the second approach here is not to look at yourself from what you do, but look at yourself from the perspective of how you create value.
Right.
Yeah? And that's an interesting approach. And I give an example of what you mentioned. You as a stand-up comedian, I can imagine the way you create value is you make people look at the world in a different way, right? And this skill set, making people look in a different way, can be applicable in other environments as well.
Yeah.
Which might not be a stand-up comedy, but might be a different setting. Yeah. So it expands your horizon. Wait a second, I can use this somewhere else, right?
Yeah.
So that's the second one. And I think the third one is that you need to realize is why you are good. Yeah, so if you're very good at being a stand-up comedian, very good at songwriting, why are you good? Because if you can codify why you're good, you also know exactly what to do more of in order to improve. Yeah?
That is, I think, a very important thing for people, I think, including me, to understand is you have to understand the elements that go into making a comedian, right? Whether it's observations, whether it's quick on your feet, thinking on the go, having, witty sort of statements to make, whatever it may be. And I think many times you lose focus because you think about the brand. I'm a comedian. Right. So what is that? You know what I mean? I think
exactly.
Caught up in that. But, yours is such an interesting thing. You went from, the direction you took from a stand-up comedian. You became a speaker, but you're also a chemical engineer. So did you learn these things just through life, the ideas of performance, efficiency? So how did those come your way?
The thing was, originally I'm trained as a chemical engineer, and the first 10 years or so, I did what engineers love to do, which is to solve problems which do not talk back. And that is typically what engineers love. So I was building chemical plants all over the world and running chemical plants. Okay. But at a certain point, I realized, wait a second, what has got me here will no longer get me there. And that's where my fascination started with high performance. And what is it that successful people, teams, and organizations do differently if they want to achieve big goals with the least amount of effort? So that moved me in a certain direction, which is about human performance and organizational performance and team performance. So I became skilled. I read a lot. I looked at things. I practiced ideas, and very soon I was doing this type of job in a corporate environment.
Okay.
building
Okay.
high performance culture. So that's how this works. And at the same time, I had a hobby. I love to do theater. I love to do stand-up comedy. I did debating a lot when I was young. So a couple of things came together which I could apply to help people, teach people, take the next step.
Yeah.
So that's where the things, the puzzle was made. And at some point, I
Interesting.
realized, wait a second, I'm using these skills, these skill sets in a very specific way, which makes me successful. This is how I create value. So this is how I have grown. So it was not a plan. I'm 9 years old, and this is how my life
Yeah.
looked like. But it's much more very pragmatic and applying the skills, using the skills that I was good at and felt that I could use and apply. And again, creating value for other people. That was the key element here.
Would you say someone like this is probably, I don't know if it can apply to everyone, but would you recommend a certain, like, some people, you ask them, they're like, yeah, I knew from the age of 6 that I wanted to be so and so. And some people are like me, I didn't have an idea of what I wanted to be like. And for the longest time, I would listen to people. You should get into a space where you can talk, where you should get into radio, you should possibly get into event management, So I was very unclear, and that would upset me, going, how can I not be clear? I'm 28. And when I did stumble on stage at an open mic, I was like, well, this doesn't seem easy, but it's exciting, and that sort of then led to the next 11 years of me doing stand-up. But for someone, would you recommend that they have a sole focus or find it, or just let life happen?
The thing is, at a certain point in time, the most successful people, they find a spark. At a certain point in time, it connects something. They are doing something. It connects to the underbelly, the solar plexus.
Yeah.
And I guess that's also the story that you mentioned, being on stage. Hey, this is something I love to do. And there can be various ways of doing it. Some people, they know it from when they are 6-year-old, I want to be a surgeon, and they love being a surgeon. That is very well possible. But I think that's the exception. Usually what I see is that if you expose yourself to testing and trying a lot of things, at a certain point in time, things will appear which will truly connect to you and create a passion. And that's where you need to explore more.
Yeah.
So that's what I recommend people is, especially when you're somewhat younger, try to do a lot of things. And if you do a lot of things, if you test a lot of things, at a certain point in time, you see something appearing, which is truly something that can be your future, and then build on that future. Don't hesitate to give it a try, right?
Yeah, that's such a practical approach. But so many times, the way the systems are, education systems, it's kind of, it's almost taking away that risk, the ability to kind of say, you know what, I'm going to sort of burn my fingers in a few places, but it might make me realize that, hey, wait a second, while doing this, there was some particular thing that interested me. You know what I mean? There's so many things that can happen as a result of just not being too focused on succeeding as quickly as possible.
Yeah, the thing is, if you're very narrowly focused, you miss opportunities. So it's important to focus, but also important not to develop a tunnel vision, because then your thinking starts to be myopic. The other thing is, and that's especially when you see with senior leadership, when senior leadership they want to improve. One other thing they need to realize is you cannot improve and look good at the same time.
Right.
So you need to accept, if I grow, if I develop, I will make mistakes, and I might not live up to this image of the senior executive who knows everything. And that is okay. It makes you human. It makes you human from that perspective.
I mean,
so
it's like a band that churns out
people
25 hits because it's the same template, versus that band which is truly lasting 50 years because they reinvent their music and they improve, and they do have bad albums, but they're truly great at the end because they did all that, right?
And I think that's the key here, and also that connects to what we discussed earlier. If you want to be a robust individual, so not fragile, but a robust individual, robust team, robust organization, your ability to test a lot determines your robustness there. Because if you trying a lot, doing a lot of different things and see what works for you, you will have options. If you narrowly focus on one line and all of a sudden this line is closed, you're out of options. And if you have to try different things at that point, you are too late, right?
What is the thing you see as a trend today? What is the patterns that are emerging in the 21st century when it comes to thing? And the reason I bring this up now is sort of I want to lead into your talk about the majority is wrong. So when it comes to the resources we have at our fingertips, literally, when it comes to access to information, disbursement of ideas, sharing of knowledge, are we going towards a future where we have a generation of truly unique individuals who are risk-taking, who are willing to sort of fail to improve? Or are we settling for a generation of people, a collective identity of mediocrity where people just don't want to put their head above because they might, might get called out?
Yeah, I always think it will be a mixed bag.
Okay.
But here's the thing, and I think that's an opportunity for the individuals who want to stand apart and not settle for mediocrity, but stand apart from a high performance perspective. And I connect to innovation, doing things differently.
Okay.
The interesting thing is if you look at innovation, a big myth about innovation is to create the next best thing, the Tesla or the iPhone. That's the next best thing. But 99.9% of all innovations are not that at all. It's something else. And 99.9% of all innovations, it's about quitting norms in your industry or in your professional field. Every industry, every professional field has certain norms in which they adhere to. For example, if you go to a bank, the norm in a bank is I take your money, I say thank you very much, I take part of the money, I give it to someone else. That's what a bank does, right? Yeah. Norms and standards. Now, innovation truly happens when you, first of all, realize these are the norms and standards in my industry. And the second thing, what is it I can quit in norms and standards, which would truly bring my professional industry to the next level? Right? Yeah. And I always use the example of IKEA. It's an old example, but people recognize this. Yeah. If for example, if I'm running a furniture shop, and norm in my industry is to build a furniture for your customers. But at a certain point in time, you say, well, I quit this norm. I let my customers build the furniture themselves. All of a sudden, you end up with a company like IKEA. And that's
something a stand-up comedian would do. Let's have a laugh. Let those guys build it.
Yeah. So what does it? Okay. So the trigger there is to, and a couple of things are very important. First of all, you need to have deep knowledge about your industry or professional field. It's not a YouTube movie, right? You need to have deep knowledge. You are the expert in that field. The second thing is once you got the expertise, you understand the limitations, the norms and standards in your field. And the third thing is to connect with others, build a relationship of other people in other industries who can challenge you to break those norms. For example, imagine I was working at IKEA. I would say, hey, this is a great idea. Let customers build their own stuff. And I would be talking to someone of Lego. They would tell me exactly, hey, this is the business model we have. We let people build their own toy. Right? And this is how we do it. So the ability to look over the wall from your own expertise, look at other businesses, other industries, other expertises, I think that's the critical ability to drive innovation and to be successful in the new world.
I think being amongst only your peers all the time, I don't think is always thing, because I think then it becomes either you're a big fish in a small pond, or you're just sort of swimming along, scared that you're going to get eaten if you kind of break away from the shoal. You know what I mean? And this is beautiful. Like if you are willing to say, where can, and that's the beauty, when you first, see, when I'm going to keep the example of stand-up alive for the sake of this conversation, is when you first get into stand-up, you were never a stand-up comedian. You were a person just doing things, whatever it could have been. In your case, a chemical engineer. In my case, I was confused after my undergrad. I'd done a stint in advertising. I had done a stint as a copywriter in a tech company, and I had no idea how to write a joke. But then when I got on stage, I had to sort of use those influences and those the non-comedic community to get my set ready. But then once that happened, I'm only associating with other comedians, and I'm like, why would you do something that, in hindsight, it's silly, right? You would throw yourself back in the world and say, where else can I get inspiration from?
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
So,
I think
yeah.
that's a great insight. One of the most successful things which happen is when I run masterminds, and what a
Hmm.
mastermind is, those are 6 to 8 individuals. They come from very different background, very different industries.
Yeah.
They have the ambition to move further, and the other ambition is that they want to help each other.
Okay.
And a person in the mastermind, for example, you would be an executive in the pharmaceutical industry.
Hmm.
They have an issue they're dealing with, and they ask the perspective of the different masterminds. And you
Okay.
got a songwriter there, you got an architect there, you got a social worker there, and they all have different perspectives, which bring their ideas from their profession to these executives, and this is how
Mm.
they learn. The executive will no longer learn being surrounded by other pharmaceutical executives. That's
Yeah.
that's not how they learn.
Yeah, yeah. And that's, in fact, something which really terrifies me now when you hear of the social media disinformation, misinformation, or whatever it could be, where you are only associating or being shown information from other people who think exactly like you, whether it's political ideology, whether it's gender ideology, whether it's sexual preference. You're kind of just having one school of thought being thrown at you, reaffirming that belief system as opposed to challenging that belief system, saying, hey, there are other ways of looking at life. And you strengthen your system by looking, and as you mentioned, not only the examples, but also the warnings, you know?
I think that is part of curiosity, and one of the tests that I apply to myself, but also to people,
Hmm.
to see if what the level of curiosity is when they oppose a certain view.
Yeah.
What I ask them is to formulate the case of that opposing view the
Mm.
way that a proponent of the opposing view would formulate this.
Right.
And if they can make the case, this is what I would say, and it is a good case, then they have understood also what the other person says. But
Yeah.
often what they have is a warped vision of the other view, a
Yeah.
straw man, so to say.
Yeah.
And it leads to myopic thinking, as not
Again,
truly
yeah.
engaged in, hey, this is a different way of thinking, different way of seeing things.
You know, Gus, for people who haven't watched your talk, could you just, you know, in give them a sense of what you meant by the majority is wrong and take us through that?
Yeah, well, what do I the point I was making, and it's in the context of innovation. The point I was
Mhm.
making is that if you look at how we operate as human beings, over 95% of our life, we simply run on automatic pilot. We think that we think, but in reality, we use heuristics. We run in the same circles in our thought. Now, what it means is if we face a problem, we go back to the old thinking, right? We do
Yeah.
more of the same things or less of the same things.
Yeah.
And my point is there's only a small group who's aware of this type of thinking and wants to think differently and applied to innovation. That's where what we discussed earlier. It's about breaking norms, breaking standards in the industry. Hey, how can we do this differently?
Yeah.
So my point is, if you want to stand apart, it's about managing your own thinking, which makes you a minority. And there's very few people who think like that and apply the thinking to, for example, innovation. And this
Okay.
is how you can create the next step. So in my talk, I was giving examples there, but also giving a very practical process how you can do this in a very systematic way for
Yeah.
yourself, for your team, and also for your organization.
Yeah, but it's so easy to just hide in the numbers, right? That so what are some of the things that contribute to making these individuals ask these questions? Like, why is it being done this way? Is it combination of family, education? Is it also to do with cultural context? Is there a certain group of people in the world? And of course, it might get controversial saying this, but are there some people who are just more in tune to saying, no, I don't like the way things are being done or we're approaching this. I'm going to, at the cost of maybe being ostracized or being called a fool, I'm going to take these risks. So what are some of the elements that go into making these people, because in hindsight, we celebrate them, right? Like, amazing what they did. But at that moment in time, it's very interesting what qualities a person needs to be like this.
Yeah, I think it's a combination of two things. First of all, it's a curiosity. Yeah?
Okay.
And curiosity means that the willingness to look over the wall
Right.
and the willingness to question things and why are we doing this. So that's one part. And I think the second component is humility. And humility means understanding the limitations that you have, the awareness in the way you think, the thinking patterns which might not work, the fact that you probably do not have all the answers or might not have deep knowledge about a subject. And what happens if you combine curiosity and humility, you become aware of your own limitations, but also look to the outside world. What is it I can learn from others? Yeah. So I think one of the biggest myths is those are individuals typically who have their own path, don't work with others. They are living, they are walking on the beat of their own drums, right?
Yeah.
But the most successful ones are very much aware of what is going on in their environment, build relationship with others that can help them to make the next step. Innovation is not done in isolation. That's not the case at all. It's especially done in cooperation and collaboration with others. So that awareness is a very important one.
You know, you mentioned just a thing or two before we wind up today is when you're sitting in, you mentioned that you could have all the skills, but you're just in the wrong environment, right? But what if you can't change your environment? Is there something fundamentally wrong with you for not being able to adapt? Or is there something which is a middle ground where you can kind of compromise? Because you mentioned these things, curiosity and this humility, but also the ability to collaborate and cooperate. But what if you can't find the right group or the right individuals to who resonate with or maybe even challenge your way of thinking to bring out that next level of innovation?
Yeah, he would be my approach. Set it as a goal. Set it as a goal 1 year or found a group, or I operate in a group. And something happens. And once you set it as a goal, all of a sudden you start to become aware of people, ideas, and circumstances in your environment, which will help you to achieve your goal. Yeah. And from a brain science perspective, the environment doesn't necessarily change, but what changes is the way you interact with the environment. So when people say, I'm stuck, usually what it means is I have built filters around me which confirm that I am stuck. Yeah. You can break through these filters by setting it as a goal. Okay, so I set it as a goal to be unstuck, to be surrounded by other people, other environment. And that's the way you can break through those filters. Yeah. So my point is there's always something that you can do, but you need to make a decision to set it as a goal.
Yeah. You know, I honestly, I'm not a business person. I have not much of an understanding of business practices or a startup. And frankly, it doesn't, it's not something I ever thought I'll be doing. But, you know, the things you've mentioned today with performance, I was skeptical, right? I'm like, is performance only at the cost of at the expense of someone else? But the things you've said, like some of the themes that just popped up, curiosity, humility, skill, luck, the idea of creating value versus just what you do. I think there's such important things that resonate on such a fundamental level. So I think, you know, on behalf of my listeners and for me, I would really like to thank you for putting it across so beautifully and in a very simple yet effective way to understand. And I'd like to thank you for being on this episode, for sharing your ideas, for doing such great work. So thank you, Paul.
It was a pleasure to be on the show.
Thank you so much. It was really lovely. Thank you. And you, at such short notice, you agreed to do this, and I really appreciate it. Thank you. So if people want to reach out to you, if they want to follow your work, read your books, can you give them the links, read out a couple of your contacts where they can find you? And I can put it in the description as well.
Yeah, the couple of ways you can reach out to me, go to my website, www.paulrulkens.com. And on this website, you can subscribe to my free newsletter. Every week you get tips and techniques about high performance. You also find a lot of information, blogs, videos about this material, so you can immerse yourself. Always nice to connect on LinkedIn, Paul Rulkens. Connect with me on LinkedIn. Happy to connect, happy to build a network. My books, they are available on Amazon. And of course, on YouTube, you have videos of my TED Talks,
Yes, of
but also
course.
of a couple of personal videos with tricks and tips on my YouTube channel. So various way you can connect with me.
Brilliant. And I hope a lot of people come your way and, and continue the great work and the journey and enjoy the lovely weather you are right now in, I can't pronounce the name of where you're from, but
In Maastricht, the Netherlands, right? Yeah.
okay, I'll let you say it because I'm going to butcher the word. Thank you so much, Paul. Appreciate it.
All right.